The squeak of a mop bucket, the clatter of a lunch tray sliding along a counter, small sounds that stitched together the first memory Daniel Miller kept of school. He was 10 then, careful with his shoulders, careful with his eyes. In the lunch line, he felt exposed the way someone feels when a seam pops and the whole world notices. All he wanted was to get through without the label anyone could see, free lunch, sticking to him like a name. He had a mind for numbers and a stubborn habit of sketching machines on the back of homework. He kept his head down and his notebooks close. Once, he had tried to laugh it off when a classmate made a joke, but the shame sat heavier than a backpack. The cafeteria worker, who had seen this 1,000 times, understood the rules of that room: dignity or humiliation, depending on how the line moved. And there was a janitor who saw a boy more clearly than the school ever did. Mr. Arthur was the kind of man people noticed in small ways: the rhythm of his mop, the careful way he swept crumbs that others ignored, the salt and pepper beard that smelled faintly of winter. He had come up from a childhood that taught him the cost of pride lost and the value of being unseen. He knew, without being told, the particular shrink of a child's posture when money, or the lack of it, was on display. One afternoon, after watching Daniel hesitate at the threshold of the lunchroom, Mr. Arthur folded his mop handle, rubbed his gloves together, and decided to do something that would require more courage than many speeches. For 3 school years, he found quiet ways to remove the sign that singled Daniel out. He slipped money to the cafeteria worker, a little at a time, asking no recognition. Sometimes he left an envelope on the back counter. Sometimes he waited until the worker's eyes met his and handed over a folded bill that said plainly, "For the boy who hates the line." Always anonymous, always insisting the moment remained small. Daniel noticed, of course. He noticed the way the lady at the register stopped scanning the little card that set him apart. He noticed the way the cashier's eyes softened and the way other kids stopped whispering. He never saw Mr. Arthur slip the money, never learned his name from the cafeteria worker. The secret had weight. It shifted something in Daniel that wasn't measured in lunches or in lunches avoided, but in the way he walked home with his head a fraction higher, the way he believed he might belong without having to prove anything. No one told Daniel that the man pushing a mop bucket had once been on the other side of that line. Mr. Arthur kept his past quiet. His acts were made to protect, not to be noticed. The kindness was a soft current under the surface of the school for 3 whole years. It did not demand repayment, and it did not announce itself. It simply made space for a boy to breathe.
20 years later, that memory still sat in Daniel the way a scar sits, unseen until warmed by sunlight. He had chased education, scholarships, late-night projects in cramped dorm rooms, and eventually he founded a company called Ascend Dynamics. People called him CEO, sometimes in the same sentence where they'd describe his inventions as clever or useful. But what never left him was the sense of being seen and the quiet certainty that someone had once bet on his dignity. Success did not erase the question. He tried to find traces: the janitor's name written in a logbook, the cafeteria worker's retired mail, a clue tucked into an old receipt. Names changed, people moved, rooms were renovated. The searching became, for a while, a private ritual. He would pause in halls that smelled of fluorescent lights and broom cleaner and think of a mop bucket's squeak. He kept wondering how many lives tilt on the fulcrum of a single unseen kindness. So he went looking. He asked around the town where he'd grown up. He spoke to teachers who still remembered a boy with a sketchbook, and to the cafeteria worker who still kept a photograph of the school staff in a drawer. Her face softened when she remembered the man who always passed by the register. He didn't want credit, she told Daniel. He just wanted you to go through the line without the whole world knowing. When he finally learned Mr. Arthur's name and where he lived, It felt both absurdly simple and profoundly necessary. Daniel knocked on a porch almost exactly 20 years after the first clatter of a lunch tray had changed the arc of his life. Mr. Arthur opened the door with paint under his fingernails and a calm that suggested he had been expecting many things, just not this. They did not rush into speeches. The first words were ordinary, the kind of sentences that hold a lifetime. Daniel said, "I wanted to say thank you." Mr. Arthur studied him, a man in a tailored coat who had the sure hands of someone who could occupy many rooms now, and asked, with a humility that had been the point all along, "For what?" Daniel said, "For giving me a way to get through school without being seen as less than." He told him how those 3 years had opened a corridor he could walk through. He described with a careful mixture of gratitude and simple fact how that quiet dignity had allowed him to focus on his work, to take a scholarship, to start a company. He did not make the kindness into a ledger. He made it into a turning point. Mr. Arthur's eyes filled, but his face did not change much. He said, "I didn't do it so you'd find me. I did it because somebody once did the same for me, because there's a rightness to seeing someone as a person first." Daniel reached into a pocket and pulled out an envelope. He did not present it like a payment. Inside were 2 things, an invitation and an offer.
The invitation was simple. Come to Ascend Dynamics, spend time in the company as an honored guest, to meet people whose lives had been touched by things Daniel's team had built. The offer was practical and grounded, a position helping design and run community workshops, and the resources to build the woodworking shop Mr. Arthur had sketched in the margins of his life. Not a showy gift, but a space, tools, and the means to do something with his hands and with his history. Mr. Arthur shook his head. For a moment there was a quiet, almost like a held breath. "I don't want a parade," he said. "I just want to make things." Then his hands closed on the envelope, and he laughed, a small sound that held relief. "A shop," he repeated. "I've always wanted a proper bench." The exchange that followed was gentle. Memories, plain thanks, and a few practical plans. Daniel listened as Mr. Arthur described the angle of a joint, the way oak felt under a plane. They walked the property together, imagining a room where light pooled on workbenches and radio static mixed with the smell of sawdust. It was a fitting exchange, neither spectacle nor business deal. 2 lives intersecting in generosity that kept its dignity intact. In the months that followed, the workshop opened, modest, warm, and filled with the noises that had always mattered. The rasp of a plane, the sigh of wood giving way, the quiet laughter of people who had something to share. Mr. Arthur reclaimed a role he had always fit, steward of tools and teacher of careful hands. At Ascend Dynamics, he found a place to consult on practical matters and to run community classes that taught young people to make instead of merely consume. When a camera caught them standing in the light that fell through a high window, they did not pose. The mop bucket squeak from the old cafeteria had been replaced by the steady music of sawdust and the hum of conversation. Daniel sometimes surprised himself with how natural it felt to tell interns the story of a lunch line and a janitor who chose to notice. He said it simply. A kindness that was anonymous became the hinge that opened more than one door. The lesson is not tidy, and it is not grandiose. It is quiet and stubborn. Small, unseen acts can widen into lives. They do not buy success. They restore